Now, the controversial French asylum immigration bill was passed at the National Assembly on Sunday night. How tough was the passage of this bill? That's evident from the fact that the French parliamentarians debated more than 61 hours to arrive at a decision. On one end, this law has been slammed by left-wing parties and migrants and human rights organizations. On the other, its voting has caused the crack within the French President Emmanuel Macron's party to surface, with one of its members announcing that he was leaving this political formation. Here's more.
It was a long week for French parliamentarians, but also a rather tumultuous one, at the end of which 228 of them voted in favour of the asylum immigration bill, while 139 voted against and 24 abstained. The bill is the love child of French Interior Minister Gérard Collomb, who sees it as a means of controlling France's share of the European migrant crisis.
As we know, this crisis has shaken our protective measures, contributed to the rise in fear, made a certain number of countries in our continent to turn to aggressive populism and xenophobia.
The new asylum immigration legislature will double to 90 days the time in which illegal migrants can be detained, reduce the asylum application process from 11 to 6 months, shorten the asylum application deadlines, make the illegal crossing of borders an offence punishable by 1 year in jail as well as fines, make the deportation of those whose asylum application has been rejected easier, and facilitate the integration of those who have been granted asylum. Within the French National Assembly, the new bill has been the subject of a real tug-of-war between all political formations. The far-right and right-wing parties, being vehemently opposed to migration, viewed Macron's reforms as insufficient. For instance, they failed at having an amendment passed for the expulsion of any migrant that could be suspected of having terrorist links. Left-wing parties within the French parliament said the new law went against the constitutional rights in France. They were also more in line with concerns expressed by migrant groups.
There are unacceptable situations which already exist due to current policies, and the asylum and immigration law will come and reinforce and destroy the fundamental rights which should be the basis of welcome and solidarity in France.
But the largest rift was perhaps within Macron's own La République En Marche political party, the LREM. 14 members of parliament within his own ranks abstained from the vote. MPs said the debates at the National Assembly made the internal divisions within LREM worse, leading to the departure of one of their members. Meanwhile, Emmanuel Macron is unlikely to backpedal on this issue, but he is facing mounting opposition at home. His woes with the striking unions, dissatisfied civil servants and students are far from over. But for now, as he heads to the US to meet his counterpart Donald Trump, his attention will be on Syria and Iran. That won't last long, however, as the dissent and discontent in France show no signs of subsiding anytime soon. Arabella Sibalak, WION.
Joining us is Elena Casas Montanez, our correspondent in Paris. Elena, it's interesting that this law is passed just before Mr. Macron's meeting with US President Donald Trump. His own party has, according to one headline, rebuked him for the passage of this bill. But what about the public mood? How do the French see this new law?
Well, I don't think that anywhere in Europe one really loses votes by trying to be too tough on migration. But it's certainly true that among many on the left and certainly many parliamentarians in Macron's own party, they do feel that this law has gone too far, that it will lead to the deportation of numerous people who actually ought to have the right to claim asylum in France. And of course what it does is reduce the amount of time that people will have to appeal by half, reduce the amount of time they have to apply for asylum in the first place after arriving in the country by half, and double the amount of time they can be held in immigration detention. It also allows for the possibility of families with children to be held in detention, which certainly for many lawmakers on the left and in Macron's own party was a step too far.
And is this irreversible? Can it be challenged in the courts?
Well, the law hasn't been passed yet. It needs to go through the Senate before that, which will be in June, we think, before Macron signs it. And then, of course, how much these individual provisions held up in court will be tested, surely, by charities, by groups who work with asylum seekers as they try and continue to defend those cases of people who are appealing a rejection decision when they've applied for asylum in France.
Right, Alina, thanks very much for joining us this evening. Emmanuel Macron, in fact, is facing many protests in France, and the recent voting of the immigration asylum law is very likely to make matters worse for him. Earlier this month, the CGT, or the French Labour Confederation, France's oldest and largest union, called for the convergence of struggles, as they called it. What this sparked was 135 strike actions across the country. Macron's biggest mistake: attempt to reform the most sacred of French privileges, its welfare system. Public sector employees, led by the railway workers of the SNCF, but also Air France, are demonstrating their opposition to proposed reforms that aim at removing job-for-life guarantees, salary and pension privileges. As of today, the strikes are keeping rail and air transport in suspense in France. Students too have joined this protest and they blocked access to 4 universities recently. They were contesting plans to make admissions more selective in the French tertiary sector. And now this migrant crisis. France has received over 100,000 asylum applications in the year 2017 alone, which is 17% higher than the previous year. Even though it accepts only a third of these requests, it still wants to curtail the growing trend through the new legal provisions. Migrant groups, in fact, have called this an attempt on their rights, an assault on their rights. And although Macron does face a lot of criticism on this issue, he has some support from some quarters. In fact, this is a problem not unique to France. Immigration is a hot topic in Europe with reason, as refugees from embattled countries, especially Syria, flock to what appear to be greener European pastures. European Union statistics from 2016 demonstrate that of 4.3 million migrants within the 28-member bloc, 2 million of these were not from an EU member country. In 2017, 650,000 first-time asylum seekers applied for international protection in the member states of the European Union. 538,000 asylum seekers were granted protection status in the member states of the European Union in 2017. These numbers, given the size of this continent and its population, native population, are very significant. In 2017, 46%, or nearly half of the EU's first instance asylum decisions resulted in positive outcomes, and migrants were given some form of residency. Citizens of Syria, Iraq and Afghanistan topped the list of whose nationals sought asylum in the EU in the 4th quarter of last year. Syrians, Iraqis and Afghans lodged a total of 46,000 applications respectively, with more than 51% of these applications coming from Syrian refugees. That is how big the migration problem is in Europe, and the continent continues to deal with it.